The more you study ancient coins, the more you notice there is a fascinating correlation between the quality of the coinage made by a nation and the historical moment that nation is living through. And I mean, it makes sense. When you're living through a golden age, you can afford the best artisans in your kingdom to take their time making dozens of beautiful coin dies, which will be used to make coins in wonderful, high quality planchets. After all, times are good, you can afford good materials and good artists. Today, however, we will be looking at the exact opposite of that. We're going to see the fall of a civilization, the fall of the Celtic world, wonderfully illustrated in just 3 coins, brought to us by our friends from the Triform Collection. And by the way, let us know in the comment section if you have a coin that illustrates the darkest days of a civilization. A coin that shows a nation going through tough times. Also, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share if you enjoy this kind of content. It really helps the channel. Historical evidence shows that the Greeks were aware of the Celts from at least the 6th century BC, and they knew they occupied large swaths of land, much more land than the Greeks held control over. The Romans also had their share of encounters with Celts from a very early date in their history, and these encounters were not always peaceful. Livy recounts that in 390 BC, a Celtic army invaded Italy, beating the Roman armies, reaching Rome, and, completely dumbstruck by the magnificence of the city, burned it to the ground. Stories like these earned the Celts a reputation of being violent and uncivilized brutes. And it's always important to remember that the term Celt is a vast overgeneralization. After all, we're talking about a civilization that occupied an area from the western coasts of the Black Sea all the way to the Iberian Peninsula, so we certainly can't call them a nation of any sort. Terms like Celtiberian, Gauls, Britons, these are still generalizations, but at least it zooms in on a more restricted geographic area. What they seem to have had in common, however, was that the Celtic way of life was much more agrarian when compared to their neighbors who lived around the shores of the Mediterranean, and this led to a simpler economy, in which a larger number of transactions were conducted with barter, especially low-level transactions, and coinage was more restricted to the higher denominations for payments of things like salaries, mercenaries, or large payments between important merchants. The Celts began to strike coins in the late 4th century. A number of Celtic tribes from all corners of Europe supported the kings Philip II and his son, Alexander the Great of Macedon, fighting on their wars as mercenaries. Celtic soldiers almost certainly were paid with Macedonian coins, which were returned to their homelands, and they just circulated. The main types of Philip II, the silver tetradrachma featuring Zeus on the obverse and the horseman on the reverse, his gold staters featuring Apollo on the obverse and the charioteer on the reverse, as well as Alexander's silver issues featuring Heracles on the obverse and Zeus seated on the reverse, these served as the 3 main prototypes for how Celtic coinage would evolve based on. As coins became popular in the Celtic sphere and they began striking their own coins, they naturally copied these designs. I mean, why change something that was already successful? But they gave it their own little Celtic twist, which leads to the typical abstract art we see associated with Celtic coins. And that's where our first coin of today comes into place. A nice little stater issued between 80 and 60 BC by the Belgae, a tribe that lived in the southern coast of Britain. Imagine how successful these coins were amongst the Greeks. We have a descendant of these old Macedonian coins, deeply changed in its iconography after centuries of abstraction, but, it was made all the way in Britain, in the British Isles, thousands of miles away from Greece where the original prototype came from. And by looking at the design, we can see what nearly 3 centuries of copying does to a coin. On the obverse, we barely have any signs of the original head of Apollo. Crossing the design on a diagonal trajectory, we have a pattern of droplet-like shapes, most likely what was left of Apollo's laurel crown. To the left of this pattern, we have another pattern, a wavy pattern, probably the remnant of his curly hair. And to the right, well, a cacophony of half moons and other shapes, probably all that was left from his face, cheeks, eyes, nose. In hindsight, by knowing how the original prototype looked like, we can actually make out what each of the designs here are meant to represent from the original. But frankly, I don't believe I would be able to make sense of all that is going on here if I didn't know what the prototype looked like. On the reverse, we have what's left from the charioteer. We now only have a single horse, made out of pallets, sticks, and crescent shapes. Despite its very simple shape, we can actually make out it's a horse quite easily. I think in this case, even if I didn't know what the original looked like, I could probably still identify it as a horse. I also like that at the very bottom part, an area in which the Greek inscription Philippo or coin of Philip or issued by Philip would be at, we instead have a pattern of crisscrossed lines and small pallets. Of course, Celtic die engravers didn't know how to write in Greek, so when they saw these letters in Greek, they just copied it in any way they could. This was probably one of the very first parts of the original design that degenerated into abstraction. Here we can also see another aspect of Celtic coinage I particularly enjoy, the fullness of the design. What I mean by this is that most Celts really, it's like they didn't like leaving parts of the coin blank, because every single crevice of the coin was filled by something. And they went crazy, they went very creative in making sure every single nook and cranny of the fields was filled with something. It's a very fun little coin. But as the 1st century BC carried on, the Celts would face an existential threat, Julius Caesar. In his Gallic Wars in the mid-50s BC, it was basically the equivalent of an apocalypse for Gallic culture. They snapped the whole Celtic political ecosystem in half. In little more than a decade, Rome managed to exploit rivalries between tribes, the good old divide et impera, divide and conquer. Rome's organized professional army marched faster than any Gallic coalition could respond, and the result was brutal. By the end of the war, a third of the Gauls were dead, another third was captured and enslaved, and the final third was now tightly under Roman control. Here in this next coin, also from Britain, a Britain still independent from Rome's imperialistic claws, even if that would change soon, we can see one of the clearest numismatic symptoms of that sudden break with Gaul, and that is how quickly gold disappears from most British coinage. This piece comes from the Durotriges, another southern British Celtic tribe. This coin comes from between 65 to 20 BC, so right at the time of the Gallic Wars. While Gaul was being turned into Roman territory, many British groups just kept striking staters anyway, not because nothing had changed, but because British tribes were still politically outside Rome's sphere, so they could keep minting coins as sovereign states. What does change is the metal. Gaul had gold mines, and the cross-channel commerce between these tribes, it helped sustain gold and electrum coinages on both sides of the channel. However, after the Roman takeover of Gaul, most British tribes had no option rather than to using silver as their main monetary metal. Gold doesn't completely disappear, but it becomes much rarer. The design follows the original design of the stylized Apollo head on the obverse and the horse on the reverse. On the reverse, it's actually noticeable how the horse has become even more abstract. Now I'm really struggling to find the horse here. But anyways, what I enjoyed the most about these coins is that by looking at it after seeing the last one, it's like you know there is a storm coming from the island of Britain. The Britons, for now, have a chance to continue their old Celtic coinage, but this is a world that is changing, and for them, it's a world that is shrinking. And as we continue on by looking at this last coin, now we can see that the apocalypse that was Rome has come to the island. Here we have another coin from the Durotriges, and if you think the silver stater was a downgrade from the gold one, how about this pitiful little cast bronze? This coin is dated to between 10 and 45 AD. After a failed attempt by Julius Caesar to conquer Britain, it was up to Emperor Claudius, quite a few decades later, to finally start conquering the island. His campaign began in 43 AD, starting by the east and then moving to the south, the southern region where the Durotriges were located. I love this little thing. It looks and feels like absolute desperation. From the original 6 grams of that stater, made in very high quality silver, now we have this little thing that weighs just 1.6 grams. It has lost all of its precious metal content. It's most likely just a fully fiduciary emergency issue to maybe represent some kind of token payment, either to pay for soldiers in a last-ditch attempt to defend their lands, or as some emergency issue without precious metals, meant to at least allow trade to continue flowing in some way. The design here is still reminiscent of the old Apollo charioteer type, but as we can see, making pretty coins must not have been a priority at that time. All that is left of the obverse is a Y-shaped central line, probably all that is left of the laurel crown, and the rest is just a bunch of dots. On the reverse, we have reached the maximum abstraction. It's just a bunch of little dots. Notice how even the manufacturing method changed. Casting coins was simpler and cheaper than producing blanks and then striking them. This is clearly a cost-cutting, emergency practicality. The apocalypse had come to the Celts. The end was upon them, and even the coins manifested this precarious situation. Fascinating. And sadly, not long after, around the 40s AD, the last Celtic coin issues disappear. Rome had other plans for them, to bring their own monetary system upon Celtic lands. Curiously, other areas conquered by Rome managed to keep striking their original monetary systems, with only visual changes being made to the coins to show Rome's control over the land. But in the case of Gaul, that's just speculation, but maybe the Romans must have considered their multitude of different denominations and local systems must have been too complicated, so they just imposed their own monetary imperial system. There was even a major mint installed in Gaul, at Lugdunum, modern-day Lyon in France, right in the heart of the new provinces. In the following decades, Rome enacted upon the Gauls and the Britons its Imperium sine fine, its empire without an end, enacting new laws and punishing anyone practicing old Celtic rites, suppressing old Druidic practices, and little by little, Gallia and Britannia became nothing but new imperial provinces under the Roman eagle. So, what do you think? Do you have a Celtic coin? Let us know in the comment section down below. Make sure to leave a like if you enjoyed. Happy collecting, and I'll see you soon. Let me give a special thank you to all of my amazing channel members and Patreons for their generous support. This channel would not be the same without your help. And if you would like to be part of this list, have early access to my videos when they are uploaded to YouTube, and a series of other perks, make sure to check out my Patreon page and my members tab on YouTube. Thank you very much.